scientific understanding of how dangerous the plant oils are if you eat them removed from the plant. And he said, there's many examples, he didn't say this, but there's many examples in the Bible of people using oil. In fact, one lady up there north of Israel, the Lord gave her enough oil to last forever, almost, didn't he? So the question is, well, what's going on here? Why? The simplest answer is, we have knowledge today that was not available then. And the scientific community, friends, I say this kindly, is running far ahead of the church. Is it not on the screen? You can't hear me very well? I'm sorry? So what shall I do about it? So what's the conclusion? Is it okay? All right. And it's interesting to me that the world, listen to this, is running away with our health message because we Adventists tend to kick against the pricks. Does that make any sense to you? I was talking to somebody last night about this, and I say this kindly, I'm one of them. Maybe I mentioned this to you, I can't recall. But when we're asked to go to churches, which we are all the time around the country in America, the pastors often are the people, men and women, who resist most the health message. And the world gets it, and they're running away with the medical capacity to make people well. So I don't think that's going to happen in this country, but something to pray about. And I have some other answers to the question that was raised, but here we are living in our day. We have this information that the scientific community has uncovered. And it makes a big difference, friends. I don't like this word, but my physician friends, they're willing to use tougher words than I am. They will say to people about the oil issue, if you cheat on this, you will not get well. You understand what I'm saying? I don't like that. But physicians, they're more free to tell you what they think. So let's not let the world run away with our health message. Let's do it ourselves. The problem we're facing, even in poor countries, we actually have a lot of affluence today. And these are the things that happen because we have enough money to buy things that aren't the best for us. And this represents how many people, men and women, die every day in this country from coronary artery disease, a 787 full. Now, if a 787 crash landed somewhere in Manila, maybe hopefully sparing people's death on the ground, would that be a big deal in the news? Of course. It would be in the news day after day after day. But we lose a plane full of people every day, friends, from heart disease, and we almost say nothing about it. Isn't that amazing? Terrible. What if another plane went down the next day someplace in this country, another 787? You know what they would do? They would ground all the 787s. Is that right? I know that. I'm a commercial pilot. And I know how in our country the Federal Aviation Authority works, and it's the same here. But we just go on with life like it's just fine. And notice this. Again, my friend John McDougall, I have such respect for this fellow. I'm sorry that he's not a believer. By the way, he was the medical director for lifestyle change in the St. Helena Sanitarium. Do you know what that is? That's where Pacific Union College. You have a PUC here, but we have a PUC there. And he was the lifestyle doc in our hospital. Not an Adventist, not even a believer. But they were feeding the people in the rooms the stuff that made them sick to begin with. And he finally just quit and went and started his own program in a town not too far away. Very, very successful. He charges serious money, and the people fill the place to come listen to him. So in any case, here's what he says about heart disease. And I mentioned this, I think, last night, but when I say heart disease, there's many things that can happen to the heart. Arrhythmias, electrical problems, problems with the valves, problems with the little tendons that run the valves, and on and on and on. But it's probably the same here. In America, when we say heart disease, we're talking about coronary artery disease. So that's what I mean unless I say otherwise. 100%, listen friends, this is astonishing. Everybody on that plane that died yesterday could have spared themselves from that death. Is that amazing? And John McDougall is not just, talking to the wind. This is correct. Now here's an amazing part. 100% of this disease is also reversible. I'm going to show you exactly how that happens in a few minutes. Remarkable claim, but it is correct. Now this is what I said a moment ago. CAD, if you will, is the most common thing. Now, I think you know this. Let me ask you. In America, if you ask the average person, is saturated fat good for your heart or bad for your heart? They would kind of all know that saturated fat is bad for you, bad for your heart. It makes you get more heart disease, makes it eat more heart disease more easily. And so, the average American says to themselves, well, if saturated fat is bad for you, then unsaturated fat should be good for you. Unfortunately, it's not true. You may not remember this, but there was a scientist by the name of Sabate. He's a friend of mine, actually, who about 35 years ago, he understood enough of the physiology that he thought this would work, and what he did was he took a certain amount of fat out of people's diet. He had a control group and a study group, and you all know about that kind of thing. He took a certain amount of fat out of what they were eating because he was feeding all of them, and then he would add a handful of oil, same amount of fat, back into their diet. And amazingly enough, it cut the incidence of heart disease by 30 or more percent. What's actually going on is, it's not all saturated fat, but much of the fat that your people in this country eat is saturated. By the way, if it's solid at room temperature, it's saturated. Can you give me an example? Did I ask you this question last night? Well, coconut oil is, if the room is a little bit warm, it's liquid, but it's 96% saturated. Give me another example, somebody. Lard? Sure. Crisco, do you call it Crisco? Comes in a can, you make pie crust out of it? You're not nodding your head, so. But if it's solid at room temperature, it's mostly or all saturated. So all these liquid oils are unsaturated. And so he took some saturated fat out and gave them the same amount of fat back in the form of oil. And he got a large decrease in death from heart disease. Only, didn't get this quite correct. The fat that he gave them was in the nuts. It wasn't just oil. Y'all with me on that? So I correct myself there. He takes some saturated fat out of their diet and gives them walnuts, same amount of fat back. And most of that, a great deal of that is unsaturated fat. And one day, he gave a lecture at Loma Linda University. There was about 300 of us there to listen to him. And at the end of his lecture, he told the story of how he fed these people nuts and there was way less heart disease. And at the end of the lecture, there's always time for Q&A. Can you imagine 300 people? Isn't that about how many chairs are in this room? Maybe? And I had the temerity to jump up and raise my hand before anybody else. And I said, were these replacement studies? And he said, oh, yes. And what I meant by that, and what he knew I meant, was just what I said. You take some saturated fat away and give them the same amount of unsaturated fat back. Are you all with me on this? Replacement studies. Americans don't get that. They've heard that olive oil is good for you. And in fact, if you took saturated fat from somebody's diet and gave them that amount of fat back in olive oil, there would be about 56% less heart attacks. Are you with me? Understanding what I'm describing? So, but in this case, instead of just giving them some kind of oil, he gave them nuts. Some saturated fat so was replaced with unsaturated fat. And here was the results. Actually, since walnuts, scientists have studied all the nuts we normally eat, including coconut. And what you're seeing on the screen is the average. In other words, let's just say that the amount of death or disease that's occurring is 100% in the country. But if you give people nuts, the yellow bar is 1 to 4 times a week, there is a decrease in coronary heart disease events. Events means a stroke or a heart attack, or even somewhere else in the body. That's a stroke or death. And take a quick look here. About what percent decrease was there in events? I can't hear you, but some of you are saying it. Isn't it about a 15% or so decrease, right? 17%. And if you give them green nuts essentially every day, what was the decrease in heart disease? Can you just roughly estimate from that? Over 50%, correct? Just because you gave them a handful of nuts, which of course you preceded by taking some fat out of their diet, right? It's amazing, friends, how effective something even like that. Now, I won't take the time to go. I have a number of slides, but it just shows it works for men or women. It works if you're young, that means less than. It works if you're a vegetarian or not. Not as well, but it still works a little bit. Even if you don't get much exercise, it works some. By the way, let me remind you, what you're looking at is the average of all the nut studies that had been done. So all the nuts work about the same. They're pretty high in unsaturated fat, except for coconut, which we love so much. Notice that exercise makes a difference, doesn't it? In fact, this is the lowest bar for all of them. So people that are active get the most effect. And even if people are overweight, this BMI over 24 means you're overweight. You get a pretty good effect. So very interesting for eating nuts. But remember, friends, don't do what my American friends do. They eat their regular meal, and then they've heard that nuts are good for you, so they eat a bunch of nuts. Are they better, the same, or worse off? They're worse off. It's amazing how uninformed. I know you folks would never do that, but that's what happens in America. All right. This is a artist's painting, a very famous artist actually, who does paintings of for anatomy books. This is the liver. There's the gallbladder, stomach, small intestine. Back here is the pancreas. You can see it there. I like this picture, in fact, a little. I think it's in here. Let me see if I can get there. I guess it's not there. So here's what happens. And I forgot to bring my whiteboard up here, so I'll have to just draw in the air for you. The liver makes bile, and it comes in what we call the common bile duct, passing through the pancreas. The other picture that I have shows this better, that's why I wanted it, and enters the small intestine about 2 inches from the bottom. There's a special valve there. And that bile pours into the small intestine. The function of bile, it does not digest, but it helps digest. I'd love to draw this on the board for you. Maybe this afternoon we may have a little more time. But it helps digest the fat. If the bile were not there and you ate a normal meal, it might take 3 or 4 times as long to digest if the bile wasn't there. Now, the issue here is that, by the way, when the bile comes down here, if the valve is closed, which lets the bile into the small intestine, then the bile fills up the gallbladder. And you all know about gallstones and so forth. The #1 surgery in America is a cholecystectomy, removing the gallbladder. And it's all because of the way people live. And you say, what happens when they remove the gallbladder? Well, a lot of people get along pretty well. There's some side effects, a little bit of disturbance in digestion maybe and so forth. But, let's just take that gallbladder out. All you have to do, folks, is change your lifestyle, and you're going to be all right. It depends on how far down the road you are with that gallbladder situation. So the cholesterol connection is this. I didn't tell you, but I am going to now. Bile is virtually pure cholesterol if you dried it. So for most Americans, and probably the same here, once the bile does its helping work, it travels all on down the small intestine, and in the last foot of the small intestine, for most Filipinos and most Americans, the bile gets reabsorbed into the bloodstream. What would that do for your heart attack risk? One word: increase. Is that correct? Y'all with me on this? You're not nodding, but you probably are nodding inwardly. If you know this, if your cholesterol is high in your blood, you're at risk for heart disease. You understand that, of course, right? Sure. Now, I'll tell you why I said most Americans or most Filipinos. Because if you eat whole food, the fiber grabs onto the bile and keeps it from being absorbed. Isn't that something? So it's excreted. Americans are on an almost zero fiber diet. Probably not the case as much in this country. So the liver increases bile with increased saturated fat intake. I didn't mention that yet. Saturated fat takes more bile than regular fat to process. It's pure cholesterol. It gets absorbed into the bloodstream, and so the risk for heart disease is increased. It's quite remarkable. Now, 50 years ago, the U.S. Surgeon General, I don't know if you have an equivalent here, it's almost always a physician, sometimes one of the allied fields, is elected to be sort of in charge of the public health. And they have quite a bit of authority with money, especially. And this man that was at that time the Surgeon General, we did not have the data. We didn't know for sure what was causing heart disease and what you could do to reduce it a lot. But just his sense of medicine and what he saw, he said something very interesting. He said, this should be preventable, maybe entirely. Today we have the data, friends. I've said this in a way. You can erase that word. Heart disease is what? Entirely preventable. Think about this, friends. It's astonishing. Astonishing. It's not a germ that causes it. It's how we live, how we eat, how we are active or not, and all those things. Now, the first study that was ever done to test this was in Finland at 2 mental hospitals, because the patients were, if you will, confined for long periods. The letters N and K are just the first letter of the names of the hospitals. And the death rate from CAD was about the same in both hospitals. About 13 to 15 people died every year out of 1,000 patients from coronary artery disease. So they decided to do in one of the hospitals a dietary intervention. So one hospital is going to be a control group, the other hospital will be the experimental group. They made 2 changes in the diet. Scientists use this term filled milk to mean you take all the animal fat out and you put back in an unsaturated fat. Now, animal fat is mostly saturated. Y'all with me? You just reach down here and pinch. You'll get an inch of it. Some of you more than an inch. It's saturated because it's what at room temperature? Solid. It may be supple, but it's still solid. Y'all with me on that? Okay? And they replaced it with soy oil. Some of you are smiling with knowing looks at certain others. They replaced it with soy oil. So they're replacing saturated fat with unsaturated fat. You get the point. And they replaced their butter with margarine. Now the deal with that is, butter is a saturated fat. Margarine is unsaturated, but just close enough to the border that it can still be solid at a fairly warm temperature. So there, you could say there's some, even though it's solid and it's a little cooler, it is an unsaturated fat. That's the point. Margarine, unlike most unsaturated fats, can be solid at room temperature, but it is an unsaturated fat. Here's the results. There was a 19% decrease in cholesterol and a 56% decrease in death. Isn't that amazing? Just because they took the animal fat out of the milk, put oil in it, and gave them margarine instead of butter. Now, some of you know that margarine has its own problems. I'm not going to deal with that yet, but I will if you'd like to later. So here's the citation in a few paragraphs from it. Dr. Turpinen said, "We feel that the findings of our study justify the conclusion that in men," now they didn't do much with women, so anyway, a cholesterol-lowering diet. Was this a cholesterol-lowering diet they were getting? 19%, correct? Decrease in how much cholesterol was in their blood. Considerably reduced mortality from heart disease. I think you'd agree that's what they did. They, the data, also indicate that total mortality was favorably affected by this diet. What's missing? Is there a married couple sitting up here near the front? Is this a married couple? Somebody's saying you are. What's your husband's first name? Nimrod? If Nimrod said to you, sweetheart, I love you, though not conclusively, would he be in trouble? Big trouble.
Of course.
Yeah. This is astonishing, friends, because I want you to see what was going on. Now, you all know, I think, what total mortality is, but just to make it clear, if you take all things that people die from and stack them up, that's total mortality, all right? And maybe you just use one color and so forth. But that's what they're referring to. And here's the problem. If there was a whole bunch less death from heart disease, how is it that total mortality was unchanged? They said, well, it might have been changed some, but it's not conclusive. So it was really unchanged, friends. So this is amazing how people are so uninformed. You'd have to ask, I don't think if you asked 1,000 people on the street in America, any one of those people would know what I'm about to tell you about this situation. I'll just read it to you. Replacement studies. Get the word replacement? Some out, some in. In Finland and later in Los Angeles, I wanted to take the time, but I won't, to tell you about the veterans domicile in Los Angeles, where they feed these men, no women in those days in the veterans domicile. So they did the same study there. But it showed there was a 50% decrease in coronary artery disease deaths. Look at the words in white, friends. But increases in what? The overall death rate was unchanged. Now, I told you this last night, didn't I? Didn't I? Cancer. These oils, friend, cause cancer. Just look at the study. Are y'all with me on this? It's insanity what we do. And I know many of you make stuff in your kitchen with oil. I'm not going to come and check or twist your arm. But I hope you get the picture, folks. This data has been out for, oh my sakes, 23. It's been out for 50 years. We knew this. And we still carry on. So give some thought. And Mrs. Brackett, if you'll come, sweetheart, there you are. Could we fit all of these people onto our property for a 6-day program? She's saying she wouldn't cook for that many. If you come there, she will teach you how to make fabulous food, folks, with nary a drop of oil. Would it be worth it? Actually, the division has asked us to come back next year and conduct a training program for groups of people who want to understand how you could set up and operate a lifestyle center where you bring people in for a week and teach them how to get well. So we'll see what happens. I hope a bunch of you are there when the division gets this all put together. My wife and I have done this kind of work for at least 50 years. We started doing 6-day programs in not quite 50 years, in 1977, and have done probably 200 plus of them in places around the country. All right, let me look at this from a slightly different perspective. Let's let this bar stand for what percent of calories is coming from fat in the average Filipino or American table, if you will. What does the S stand for? And the U? Right. So that's approximately how Americans and Filipinos are living. And this is what they did in the study. They replaced some saturated with unsaturated. Same amount of fat. That's why the tops are the same level. But this is what Americans thought they were supposed to do. They did everything like they did before. They just added some olive oil because they heard it was good for them. I say this tongue-in-cheek. Are you aware of the fact that Americans are more stupid than Filipinos? Are you aware of that? Maybe I'll just say uninformed. Now, Americans are getting about 40% of their calories from fat. You are too. If you go to your physician and he or she diagnoses some coronary artery disease, they will tell you, they're supposed to put you on the American Heart Association diet, which cuts the total fat down to 30%, 30% of your calories now only coming from fat. And what about the saturated fat? Way low, correct? And the reason is that saturated fat is bad for your heart. And the total fat was reduced. That's a pretty good plan. I'll show you something very, very interesting. This is an artist's drawing of an artery. Artery has 2 layers of muscle. They have names which aren't terribly important to us this morning. That's the outer layer of muscle. There's the inner layer of muscle. And then there's something very, very interesting. There is a layer, 1 cell thick, lining every artery in your body, like sort of a tube in there. It has a fancy name, it's not important, but many of you will know that this is called the intima, this single cell layer. What most of you are unaware with, likely, is that plaque, you all know what I'm talking about when I say plaque. It's this buildup in the arteries. The plaque forms not in the artery, but under the lining. And the plaque is mushy. In fact, I'll show you in a minute, atherosclerosis. Athero is a Greek word that means mush. Sclerosis is a Greek word that means hard. Now, when the plaque is first laid down, it's not hard. It turns out that hard plaque is not dangerous. Only 1 heart attack out of 100 occurs because hard plaque filled the artery. You tracking with me? The soft plaque is what's dangerous. The reason is, if the lining is unhealthy and some soft plaque oozes out into the bloodstream through the crack in the unhealthy lining, a clot of blood forms in seconds and fills the artery. 99% of heart attacks are like that. Now, the body seems to understand that soft plaque is dangerous, so it desperately, and it's a marvelous, I won't even get into it, it's a marvelous production of chemicals and moving substances. The body desperately is trying to turn soft plaque into, guess what? Hard plaque. Hard plaque won't ooze through there and cause a heart attack. You follow what I'm saying? So, the artist now draws the artery. It's not a great drawing. The intima should continue right across there with, it would be hard to even draw a little crack here or a crack there. The artist has drawn it like it's broken up. That is not what happens. That intima is still there, but it's likely to be unhealthy because of the way this person is living. And if the soft stuff breaks through the intima, a clot fills this and the person dies. Are y'all with me on this? Last night I talked about the fact that I'm comfortable with questions. I should have reminded you although people, they're very slow to do that, but I would be pleased if you just raise your hand, and I guess somebody might even have a microphone for you so those who aren't here can hear. But are we clear so far, or is there a question somebody could ask to clarify something? Not a soul. Okay. I'm sorry? Later. Okay, later. I just want you to know I'm totally comfortable to be interrupted. I was a classroom teacher for many years, and if kids aren't asking questions, the probability is that they're not learning very well. But not grown-ups, of course, you understand. But please, interrupt me. I'm very, very comfortable with that. Okay. Atherosclerosis is mush, and the body tries to make it hard. Now, Dr. Dean Ornish, physician, University of California. What else do I want to say? San Francisco campus. UC, University of California, there's about 25 of them. So you have to say, which campus was it on? This was the San Francisco campus. And he tried to get money from the government to see if you could reverse the soft stuff. And everybody knew you can't reverse it, so they wouldn't give him any money. It's sometimes insanity the way governments work. I have so much respect for this fellow. He's not a believer, but I just respect him so much. He went out and raised $3 million on his own and conducted this study where he put people on a very restricted program. He got their fat intake down to 10% of their calories. What's the average American or Filipino, what's their average percentage of fat in their diet? Pretty high, 40% probably. So he took away all the animal products, which are virtually all high in fat. And then he took away the 4 categories of plants that are high in fat. You know what those are? Did I mention it last night? Olives, avocados, nuts, and seeds. Those are perfect food, folks, but they are high in fat. So in order to get their fat intake is what he thought would be low enough, he had to even take those away. He did a number of other things. He had them do yoga. He had them in groups to encourage each other. A number of things that probably were not a picture. It wasn't the best science. He did about 6 things. But I still have tremendous respect for what he did. And then he had the control group. Oh, by the way, he had them certain amount of activity. He had them besides yoga, he had them do group therapy, things like that. Probably didn't have much effect, but the reason this is not good science, folks, supposing you come out with a positive outcome, do you know what caused it? Because there's too many variables, right? But I still respect him for what he did, because he got an amazing outcome to the world anyway. After 1 year, he showed that their plaque, I didn't tell you, he had 24 men in serious trouble with heart disease, and there were angiograms from all of those men, and he took each ½ centimeter of each artery and wrote down what the blockage was for the 3 main coronary arteries. And so for each person, he had an average blockage over all 3 arteries. There's other arteries besides those 3, but nevertheless. And he also had the same thing for the control group. And the bar here represents the average of all 12 guys, about 40% blockage. And at the end of 1 year, on this whole plant regimen, they had a decrease in plaque of almost 6%. Now, I would just be delighted if you were so impressed, you would have all said, wow. But I understand. It is wow, though, isn't it? When the whole medical community knew that you could not do this, right? So they wouldn't give him any money to even try. That's why I respect him so much, folks. He was willing to work outside the box. Now, the control group, the other 12 men, of course, they were selected at random out of these 24 men. You understand that? Their average blockage over the whole group was just a little higher. It's not significant. And he told them, he didn't control it at all. He said, be careful with your lifestyle. I'm sorry, I'll take that back. He put them on the American Heart Association diet. My mistake. And their plaque increased by almost 9%. On the what? American. This is amazing, friends, how problematic some of these things can be. All right, there it is, the American Heart Association diet. This is an actual photograph. I got these from Dr. William Castelli. Are any of you professionals familiar with that name? Any of you professionals familiar with what they call the Framingham Heart Study? One person's nodding their head. Framingham is a little town in the big town of Boston, Massachusetts. They call it a bedroom community. And money was obtained to study a fairly large cohort of men, 4,000 of them, they weren't trying to have them do anything. They just put them in the study, and they have been following them ever since. And Dr. William Castelli is the man who put this all together and directed the study for many years. I've had several conversations with him about this whole thing and other physicians who have worked with it. And much of the data we have today about this terrible thing comes from the Framingham Heart Study. They didn't have any women to begin with. About 15 years ago, they finally started with a group of females. But the main reason was that females have so much less heart disease than males do, but they finally did recruit a group of females. In any case, I got these slides from Dr. Castelli. And again, it's coming out of the screen, chopped off. We call it a cross-section, as you probably know. And here is the outside of the artery, all the way around the picture. There is hard plaque, soft plaque. We actually call it the atheromatous core. What does atheroma mean? What does athero mean? Mush. So the atheromatous core is what this is labeled in the medical literature, because but notice what the body is doing. It's desperately trying to change all this soft plaque, which it was, to what? Hard plaque. Now, this is a fairly safe atheroma. It's covered with a big chunk of hard. This is very unlikely to be a heart attack. So this is the body's effort. And that's about, I don't know, 17% of the artery. It may not even be that high of the volume passageway for blood to flow. Here's another one. There's the outside of the artery. That's there's a name for this. That's the passage that's still open. That's this atheromatous core. And in this picture, normally it's hard to see it because it's only one cell thick. Can you see the intima? Everybody? Can you? Yeah, pretty interesting. Because it's so thin. And this is the atheromatous core. This looks pretty dangerous to me. If this person is not taking care of their bodies, that could be easily cracked open and cause a heart attack. Now I have to wait for my arrows since I accidentally forwarded the slide. This one, here again, outside of the artery, hard plaque, soft plaque, kind of distributed like that. And guess what this is right here? That's where the soft plaque broke through the lining and caused this clot to form in several seconds. Got it? And this person died from this event. So this is the American Heart Association diet. And does plaque increase or decrease or stay the same on that diet? Talk to me, please. It gets worse, right? The AHA diet is not sufficient to stop the growth or certainly to reverse it. That's what Dean Ornish did. He cut the total fat down to 10%, only plants, and even removing the high-fat plants, and the tiniest little bit of saturated fat. And with that program, folks, he got the disease to reverse. Are you with me? Now, I didn't even ask when I'm supposed to quit. Am I out of time about now? Does anybody know? You're saying, yeah, I'm out of time? Okay. I have 1 minute left. Okay. You wouldn't let me stretch that minute by any chance. Okay. Notice, friends, this makes you worse. This makes you better. Are y'all with me? So somewhere in between, you don't get worse or better, right? And it turns out, I taught college nutrition for about 10 years. And I had the students for 1 month keep track of everything they ate. It's easy with computers these days. And I was interested mainly in what their percentage of fat was in their diet. Now, they could eat, if they chose to, at Neva's table. And I found that those who ate at Neva's table had a fat intake of about 24%. So the idea is, on just a regular whole plant regimen, this is where you are. You don't need to get better because maybe you don't have any plaque, and it's not going to make any plaque. It's not going to make it worse. You follow that? Please say yes. Okay, God bless you.
Okay. Thank you, Pastor Jim, for another interesting presentation. I think it's time for us to go nuts with nuts. Do you have any questions? We only have a few minutes for our question and answer. Any question? Okay, I guess I have one. The first question.
Okay. Go ahead.
How much amount of nuts is ideal for our daily need?
Good question. Did you hear what she said? How much nuts should you eat? There's no real hard line, but we tell people a handful of nuts a day is probably about a good idea. I could eat a lot more than that. I don't know about you, but I try to limit myself to that.
Okay, thank you.
There's no study that shows this, but we can just tell from the general situation. Would be probably about a good idea.
Okay, thank you, Pastor. Any other question, please? Yes, sir.
Thank you. This is a continuation of last night's lecture about the ill effect of oil. Do you recommend the use of air fryer not to use for cooking?
To make potato chips or whatever. Absolutely. By the way, Here's an interesting story. Did I tell you this already? Ellen White had a maid who was baking potatoes. And the maid was brushing oil on the potatoes. And Ellen White said to her, "We don't fry." And the lady said, "We're not frying. We're just," she said, and Ellen White repeated it, "We don't fry." I'm sorry, dear. I thought I made that clear. They were putting the potatoes in the oven to bake, and the lady was painting them with oil. And Ellen White said, "That's frying." So, yeah, we make potato chips, we make corn chips. Oh, you know what's really the best is shoestring made from yams, or I can't hear you, dear. Sweet potatoes. You grow sweet potatoes here, don't you? Make them, bake them, make them into shoestrings. Man, they're fabulous. Okay.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
Psyllium?
Yeah, instead of eating fiber or
Isn't psyllium a seed, sort of? The husk? Yeah, okay. If it's edible, it's probably just fine. I don't know how you would take the husk, grind it up or something, and mix it with... You can buy it in sort of like a powder, kind of. Yeah, oh, fine. Yeah. It's part of the plant, isn't it? Psyllium, right? It's fine. Neva said, you know, at the Five Loaves Deli and Bakery that we operated for 10 years in Seattle, we made 19 different kinds of bread. And all whole grain. And Neva just reminded me that one of those types of bread had psyllium in it. So, and flax. Yeah. Yeah, good stuff.
Okay, some more questions at the back, please. Okay, no more. I think there's no more question. Thank you very much, Pastor.
For our closing song, shall we all rise and sing our theme song, The Great Physician? The great physician always near, the sympathizing Jesus. He speaks the drooping heart to cheer. Oh, hear the voice of Jesus. Sweetest note in syrup song, sweetest name on mortal tongue, sweetest carol ever sung, Jesus, blessed Jesus. Your many sins were all forgiven. Oh, hear the voice of Jesus. Go on your way in peace to heaven and wear a crown with Jesus. Sweetest note in syrup song, sweetest name on mortal tongue, sweetest carol ever sung, Jesus, blessed Jesus. All glory to the risen Lamb. I now believe in Jesus. I love the blessed Savior's name. Jesus. Oh, how my soul delights to hear the charming name of Jesus. Sweetest note in syrup song, sweetest name on mortal tongue, sweetest carol ever sung, Jesus, blessed Jesus.
Let us all bow our heads and let's pray. Almighty God, our loving Father in heaven, our Almighty Creator, we come to you this morning to worship you. Thank you for this Sabbath and for this opportunity to worship you together. Thank you, Father in heaven, for creating us perfectly. Though our nature is marred by sin, you have provided everything for us to be restored back to what you have planned for the glory that you have set for each one of us. The, 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 the pinnacle of your creation, Father in heaven. And so again this morning we thank you that you have reminded us, added to our knowledge of how we can keep this body that you have given to us in the best possible condition so we can continue to serve you with the best that we have. We thank you once again, Father, for giving us everything this morning, all these blessings today. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Joyful Sabbath, everyone. Hello. Good morning. On behalf of AUP administration and the Philippine International Church, I warmly welcome you, dear brothers and sisters, in our divine worship this Sabbath. Worshiping with us today are our friends from their homes and other places anywhere in the world through our AUP Facebook page live streaming and Brother Winelfred Pasamba's YouTube channel. Welcome, dear online worshipers. Also with us are our brothers and sisters from IS. May I request them to please stand? Yes, the sisters are not around. Maybe they're taking a nature break. Welcome to AUP and welcome to our divine worship this morning. Also with us, dear brothers and sisters, are the members of the team of Pastor and Mrs. Jim Brackett. May I request them also to please stand? Welcome to Finster Hall of All Nations. For our announcement, first, let us not miss the other half of our seminar. We've started last night and we have the half this afternoon. Two more topics that are equally important and interesting are scheduled in the afternoon. These topics are, first, you need to avoid carbs, right? Wrong. Wow, isn't that interesting? And also protein. Now you need it, now you don't. They are very interesting and I will not miss them. So in our quest to heal our lifestyles and be able to serve our God better, let us not miss the opportunity to listen to our guests. And let us go to PIC because our afternoon sessions will be held at PIC. Let us go there with our family members and with our friends. Let us spread the word around. Let us share the invitation so that many of us will be blessed in the lectures that will be shared to us this afternoon. Second and last announcement. To our friends who have come from far, please join us in our fellowship potluck with our guests, and this will be held at the General Administration Conference Room right there. That's the building right when you go out of the Finster Hall. For this hour's topic is DNA and the cancer conundrum. Also a very interesting one. I know that we will surely benefit from this. And it's a real blessing to listen once more to Pastor Jim Brackett. Pastor Jim is the director of the Live Better seminars. And he and his wife come all the way from the eastern Washington state in the U.S. Pastor Brackett, as introduced last night, who has a wealth of experience in the academe, holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in physics and mathematics. Also nearly completed theology and electrical engineering courses. He earned his master's degree in nuclear physics from La Sierra University and Master in Science in Public Health degree from Loma Linda University. He served as a pastor and administrator in various conferences in the U.S., also as vice president, administrator for Waymart College, and as an evangelist for Amazing Facts. Their passion, Pastor Jim's and his wife, Ma'am Neva, passions for medical missionary work has taken them all over the world, and that is why they're here with us at AUP. This is where they have presented thousands of health lectures, cooking classes, and medical missionary training. They're also the authors of 7 Secrets to Health cookbook and 2 other vegan recipes.